So once we head into the Data Import Manager, we're brought to the template list. Don't confuse importing templates for document templates. They are not the same thing. In fact, most document templates are Word documents, whereas all of our importing templates are .csv files or comma separated value files. Of course, when we come on in here for the first time, there are no importing templates made. CobbleStone does not presume to know the data that you want to bring in, the data that you already have ready to bring with you, or the fields that you might want to populate. So we leave it up to our clients to start building these, though we will typically help them out when it comes to building and processing their first couple imports. CobbleStone does also, of course, offer importing services that we can work with as for an additional fee. We can help import records into the system. When we go to the right-hand side of our template list, we've got four options: view templates, add template, manage fields, and manage files. Our first stop is going to be add template. And when we click that, we're brought to a template overview ad screen. We have three areas here, and they are all incredibly important. The display name, while the system doesn't care too much about the display name, it's important for your display name to be fairly precise so you know what you're looking at and what you're looking for if you need to use this importing template again. The file name. The file name can technically be whatever you want. I have found for best practice to use the display name, typically in a shortened form and in camel case, as opposed to standard casing and spacing. One thing of note here is that the file name must, absolutely must, end in .csv. If we do not end the file name in .csv, this template will not work. So if I was importing new contracts, I'd probably call the display name new contracts. I might call the file name new con.csv and run that all together with no spaces. And then finally, we have the linked to. To what table are we importing this data? We can import to nearly any table in the system. We've got a wide variety of tables that we can choose from. So we need to know the area to which we are importing. And that's where we would select that. Now, please note that the display name can be changed after you've saved. However, you do not really want to change the file name, and you cannot change the linked to. So once we've created this, we are taken into our field selection. We can also edit an existing template to get to its field selection. So when we're in here and we click Manage Fields for the template that we've got selected, we're brought to this should already be familiar, fairly tried and true field selection style. And just like everything else, we're going to take them from the left and move them to the right. There are some key notes here, however. The first is that the order of our fields is incredibly important. This works very much like an ad hoc report, in that the fields, as they're selected on the right-hand side from top to bottom, are the fields as they're going to display from left to right in our importing template. And we do not ever want to move around the columns, the fields, from one column to another. They must, absolutely must, stay in the same order as they display on the screen and they display on the .csv template. If you move it in one place, make sure you move it in the other and that they match 100%. So once we've started bringing across our fields, we have three items here. Our friendly name. The friendly name is actually fairly important here. The friendly name is the column header in our importing CSV file. That column header must match the friendly name. You can shorten it here, and then when we download the CSV, it will be the shortened form there. But you want to make sure those match perfectly, just like our order and just like our file name. Then we have our description field that's completely optional. We have 2 tick boxes at the bottom of each field selection. Is filter and requires lookup. We'll talk about is filter first. Is filter is used when we are updating information en masse as opposed to importing it. So that's the second use for our data import manager, is processing mass updates. And is filter is your reference point. It is what are we looking this up to determine what we are updating. Typically speaking, we would select something like the contract ID or whatever the primary table's ID field is, because we need to ensure that it is a 100% unique value for the reference. We're filtering it by our reference. Now, that is filter field itself does not get updated, but all of the other fields that we have selected do. Just for sake of sanity, I tend to put my updating field, my is filter, at the very top of the list on the right-hand side, just so it appears on the far left on my data import and update template. Again, making sure I have that is filter field marked. The other tick box is requires lookup. And as we've discussed previously, many of the different records in CobbleStone are referenced with ID values, and some of those tables are linked together. CobbleStone recognizes them, of course, by their ID values. And when we're performing an import, we want to give it the ID values for the status, for the department, for the counterparty, for the employee, whatever key piece of information we're talking about that lives on a linked table. We do, however, have the option to mark requires lookup. And if we mark requires lookup, what we're telling CobbleStone is, for this field, I am feeding you the one-to-one match text value instead of the ID value. For example, if I was inserting the status for a contract, the out-of-the-box active status is 33. That's the ID. So typically, I would put in that column 33 if that particular record was to be marked as active. However, I could also feed it capital A, CTIVE, and mark the requires lookup box. And then for all of my status values, it's going to look for that one-to-one match inside of CobbleStone. To be perfectly fair, I prefer to do the lookup outside of CobbleStone. What I like to do is have my text values and then export the table that's hosting that actual piece of data from CobbleStone and perform a VLOOKUP in Excel. So I've got a match for the text value to the ID, and then I'm uploading it with the ID in the import manager. Do you have any questions about field selection or use when it comes to an importing template?
So if we can export the data in CSV format and again we are importing it to here, we can have less number of fields also. Is that possible, right?
So, to a certain degree, yes. So what we'd be really looking at here is an export. Those tend to come out in XLSX files or XLS files. So we're importing them to a native Excel file. The import, on the other hand, is a CSV. But what that lets us do is, instead of giving the, so if we're performing a VLOOKUP there, we can give the ID value rather than the text value, and we know we've got a solid value. We know we've got a one-to-one match. Whereas if we mark requires lookup, it's kind of like CobbleStone is performing the VLOOKUP for us. However, if it runs into an item that does not match, it doesn't know what to do with it. So that's like getting an NA in our VLOOKUP in Excel. So if I was exporting data to perform a VLOOKUP and then turn around and import contracts, for example, I would have in one spreadsheet my contract data and maybe a field for the employee name, a field for the counterparty name, and a field for my status. And all of those are going to be uploaded when I'm uploading my new records. Well, all three of those items, my employee, my counterparty, and my status, are linked tables to the contract details table. So what CobbleStone is really looking for is that ID number. So I'd be giving it the ID by way of my VLOOKUP, so long as I copy and paste the actual value and not the equation on in there. You did ask about having fewer or more fields, though, and that's actually a great question. And one thing to keep in mind, if we're performing an update and the field is blank for a field that's selected here, it will import a blank into that field. It is taking exactly what you give it and importing that. That means if you have existing data in that field, but you're not uploading data to that field, it is going to blank it out if that field is on your importing template. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
So it handles the null values also, right? Properly.
Yes, it will absolutely handle a null value, but it will return a null value. And that's where I'm saying you've got to be really careful. If I am making a mass update, for example, and one of my fields that's selected is effective date, and I'm just kind of pulling that one out of the air, my effective date, and I have 100 contracts that I'm importing. I'm making these updates, and 90 of them have the effective date populated, but 10 of them, they're not changing, so I haven't populated that field. On those 10, if I have a null value in that field for Excel, it is going to overwrite the data in CobbleStone with a null value.
Okay.
Any other questions about our field selection in the process?
Actually, we can modify the fields in CobbleStone software, right? So once we exported, then later some of the admin, like one of the admin, he came and he changed the date format, some region. Instead of EST, he changed it to PST time zone, something like that. Then when we are importing the data, so the CobbleStone like import manager will recognize those changes actually.
It will. Yes, it absolutely will. And we're actually going to talk about that in just a moment, but it absolutely will. So because the name of the field is referential, it's going to update everywhere across the system. And we can see that I have created a fair number of templates that I could use at any point. We can see I've got the import ID, my file name, the table to which I'm making these inserts, so on and so on. So a lot of incredibly important information.
This managed setup will show to everyone, right? Like
no,
all admins, right?
So it will not show to everyone. And that's actually something that we're going to talk about when we're talking menu management. But typically speaking, the managed setup menu is only available to the individuals who are marked as system administrators. We can set it up so it's only set to be available to system administrators. But we can change who can access this menu. All of that said, we could also work with our permissions And if those permissions are available, process through here. But this area really should only ever be accessed by a system administrator.
Okay.
So if I was creating a brand new template, I'd go ahead and fill out the display name, the file name, including .csv, and then select my area, my table. So I'm going to say new contract test, new contest.csv. And because I'm importing contracts, I'm going to select my contract details. And just in case I already have that, I'm going to put a 2 in there. So now I would go through and start selecting my fields. I can choose if this is going to be an update. I would probably select my contract ID and make sure that I mark that as is filter. I also have the opportunity to mark the update only button. And so when checked, this option prevents new records from being added to the import. And of course, with this, we must have at least one field marked as is filter, stating that you only want to have one field marked as is filter. Now, with the idea here, this is for new contracts, so I don't necessarily want my contract ID because the system automatically populates that. But I would go ahead and start selecting the rest of my fields. Now, in this case, I'm going to go back to viewing my templates, and we will take a look at, so I'm going to edit new contracts.csv. We can take a look at what I've selected here. So now that I'm in my new contracts, I'm going to go to manage fields. And we can take a look at everything that's going on. Now you'll note I don't have my ID, I don't have an is filter. Update only is not marked because this is for importing brand new information. And I've selected my contract title, my vendor name, my employee, my effective and expiration dates, contract type, department, status, and description fields. If these are okay, I'm going to click Save Template Fields. And then I can return to View Templates